Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Dick and Sharon here, joining you again with Bill Blum. Bill Blum is a former judge and death penalty defense attorney. He is the author of 3 legal thrillers published by Penguin Putnam, and he is a contributing writer for LA Progressive, Truth Dig, Truth Out. Am I right, Bill?
I've written
Truth,
for Truth Out.
okay.
The Progressives, and another one I'm a regular for.
And the Progressive, which we love all of those publications. And happily, we're so fortunate that he's gracious enough to allow us to republish his content. And I was just remarking to Bill before we hit the record button that sadly, a lot of what he writes comes to pass. And I'm hoping that that won't be the case with the piece that we're going to be talking about today, which is entitled Bloody Sunday, State of Emergency at the Border. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks. Always great to be with you.
Right.
So,
So this article that Bill has written is about the efforts by Kristi Noem, who's the head of the Homeland Security Agency, and Pete Hegseth, and really Donald Trump, to resurrect some old laws, the Insurrection Act of 1807 and the National Emergencies Act of 1976, purportedly to allow Trump to have American military troops along the border, but we know it would never stop there. Right, Bill?
well, that's right. So, we're expecting a report from those 2 cabinet heads on Sunday or soon thereafter. That's the deadline that was set by a proclamation and an executive order issued on January 20, the day of the inauguration for the second Trump term, which declared an emergency, national emergency on the southern border, and set forth a bunch of actions to take place, including all sorts of task force to be coordinated together with uh, deployment of the military to protect against what these actions call an invasion along the southern border. So we're waiting to see what this report will say. And the proclamation says the report is to address what actions are to be taken, including the invocation of the Insurrection Act of 1807. That act gives the president the authority to deploy the U.S. military and to federalize the National Guard to protect against insurrection, rebellion, or combinations, which are essentially demonstrations or organizations that threaten to obstruct either federal law or make state law impossible to enforce. And we've had presidents who've invoked the Insurrection Act many, many times in our history, 30 times to be exact. The last time in 1992, during the riots in Los Angeles, that followed the exoneration of the police officers who beat up Rodney King. And usually, when the Insurrection Act is invoked, it's highly targeted in terms of geography and in terms of duration. But what we're especially concerned about in the hands of Donald Trump is that this time, invoking the Insurrection Act to stop what he calls an invasion, which is really a fiction because it's not an invasion of undocumented people. There's no foreign power that is invading the United States. Wouldn't be limited to the immediate border area or to any particular part of the immediate border area, but would extend to what we call the expanded border zone, which legally comprises the border of the United States extending into 100 miles from whatever the international boundary is. So that's a lot of our big cities, and it's all of the state of Florida. So it would be all of Los Angeles. So we don't know what this report is going to say, but I think it will probably um, give a green light to Trump invoking again the National Emergencies Act, which he did with the proclamation, along with the right to, at his discretion, invoke the insurrection. Now, the Insurrection Act is supposed to be linked by another set of laws called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which is supposed to prohibit the deployment of the U.S. military within the boundaries of the United States. So it can't be deployed domestically. But the Insurrection Act is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. So we're waiting for this report, and it's due on Sunday, which coincidentally is Easter, the last day of Passover, International Weed Day, Marijuana Day is the 420, Chinese Language Day, and it's also the anniversary of Hitler's birth, which may or may not be a coincidence. So I think we're going to get this report. I don't know how soon the report will become public. And of course, we don't know what the report is going to say. There's absolutely no legal basis for invoking the Insurrection Act in connection with the border, especially at this time, because border crossings are way down now. And at the same time, while this report may say we've got to give the president the authority to invoke the Insurrection Act to contain the border anytime we want to, Trump is also saying, oh, we've slowed down the traffic at the border, and we basically have secured the border. So he's arguing opposites, which he often does. He's doing the same thing with tariffs. At the same time, he's saying we're going to impose these crazy tariffs to promote American industry, and at the same time, we're going to repeal the income tax because tariffs will raise so much revenue. Well, if you think about it, but only if the tariffs are really successful, and this is a huge if, and people start buying American, then no one will be paying the tariffs because we won't be importing. And so there'll be no revenue raised. So it doesn't make any sense. And so it's a bit like that with the Insurrection Act, except it's even more dangerous. Who knows where it would stop? Now, this National Emergencies Act, which goes along with it, was designed to contain the president's power to declare national emergencies. It was a Watergate-related reform, but it doesn't do that at all. It doesn't limit the president's discretion. It simply says that when you declare a national emergency, you got to cite some statutory authority and invoking another statutory power in order to supplement the declaration of an emergency. So the Insurrection Act would be one of those. But these powers that the president has pursuant to this National Emergency Act are really extensive. And the Brennan Center, which is part of NYU in New York City, has researched this and said there are about 150 different statutory powers that the president could invoke through a national emergency declaration. And all presidents, or most presidents, have declared a national emergency of one kind or another. After 9/11, we declared certain national emergencies. We still have many that are operating that prohibit arms shipments to so-called terrorist organizations and many others. But in the hands of Donald Trump, this National Emergency Act is especially dangerous. Congress is supposed to review all the declared national emergencies every 6 months. That doesn't happen. And Congress can override a declaration of national emergency, but it really needs 2/3 in a joint resolution, both houses of Congress. So that's not going to happen. So what I think might occur, and I hope I'm wrong, is that Hegseth and Noem will say, yes, we want you to be able to invoke the Insurrection Act. There's a need to do that. And there's probably a need for you also, again, to invoke the National Emergencies Act. That's why I included it in the article, to declare other sorts of powers that you might have. And these other sorts of powers are so extensive and totalitarian potentially that one of them even allows the president to seize control of wire communications. That really hasn't been done. FDR had this Office of Censorship during World War II. Woodrow Wilson, actually, before this power was codified in the 1934 Communications Act, actually shut down certain radio stations. But those were during wartime and world wars, furthermore. So who knows what Donald Trump would do with all of these emergency type powers. We will get this report, as I said, probably Sunday or soon thereafter. I mean, Sunday's Easter, and maybe they'll take that day off and they'll come in on Monday. But by next week, we should have some reporting on whether or not we got the report, what the report says, and we'll get some inkling as to what Trump will do. My sense is that he's not going to declare a not going to invoke the Insurrection Act right away. He's got a lot of things going on right now with the tariffs, with all of the deportation cases involving students and the detention of graduate students all over the country that's occurring. And his favorability numbers are sinking. His rating on the performance of the economy is really tanking. And he's going after law firms, and some law firms are fighting back. And I think one plus side, one thing on the plus side of this equation is that the Justice Department is getting overtaxed. The Justice Department can only do so much, and they've lost a lot of good lawyers, and they have to defend all these cases. It's not just that Trump is bringing all these executive orders forward and flooding the zone, so to speak, with presidential actions. They now have to be defended. So were he to invoke the Insurrection Act, and that is largely up to him, and he would be insulated to a substantial extent from judicial review, that Insurrection Act would still be limited by the Constitution. So you still have the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, and there will be tremendous legal challenges if he does so. So the first step to keep your eye out for is, will there be a report? Second, what will the report say? And third, what is Trump going to say he will do with the report in hand? So those are the three things to keep your eyes on.
So my concern, Bill, first of all, I think I said this in the opening. Sadly, a lot of what you predict does become reality. And I remember us talking about the international courts and the ruling on Netanyahu. And how has that impacted him? It doesn't seem to have impacted him at all, in fact.
No, in fact, let me just interject here. One of the declarations of national emergency in effect now pertains to the International Criminal Court and the sanctions that Trump has reimposed on it. So these are sanctions against the chief prosecutor and the court as a whole. So the key court personnel can't come to the United States, and their assets can be attached, assuming that Trump could ever do that. So that's one of the emergency powers that's actually operative right now.
Okay, let me finish. Okay, so I wanted to get back to this Insurrection Act. And I was looking up some information, and forgive me if you've already mentioned this, but the Insurrection Act, unlike declaring martial law, does not require congressional approval. So it seems to me that Trump, all you have to do is just give him an inch and he takes a mile.
That's right.
And so because the Insurrection Act does not require congressional approval, but it in some ways behaves like martial law, we should be prepared for what Trump will do, regardless of what the report says. I think he's already shown us that he wants to be a king. He wants to.
Right. So there's a difference between martial.
Yes.
There's a difference between martial law writ large and the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act's usually very targeted as to time and place. Martial law would be everywhere. You'd have military law, you'd have a dictatorship. Were Trump to do that, there would be a massive, both active and passive rebellion in the United States. If they're trying to tell people essentially what they can read, what they can think, and even people who aren't political, they want to listen to their own music. They want to watch what they want to watch on the internet, on YouTube, or television. They want to get out and celebrate the way that they feel that it makes them feel good. And martial law is not something that's going to go down well with the population.
But what I see the Insurrection
Not at
Act
all.
doing is it gives the Trump administration a tool to use against marginalized communities.
That's
So
right.
whereas martial law would affect everybody, the Insurrection Act, like during the first Trump administration, he came close to using the Insurrection Act to
That's
come
right.
after the Black Lives Matter protesters.
Right.
I don't see any reason that he would stop this time. I think
Oh,
that
no, he won't. He won't. So the more likely scenario is, let's say that tomorrow, the 19th, there are demonstrations all over the place. Let's say one of them is massive, and one of them involves some kind of violence, regardless of who perpetrates it, whether it's agents provocateur or it's some crazies on the left who provoke the violence. After Sunday, he'll have the imprimatur of the cabinet heads of the Department of Defense and Homeland Security saying, yes, use the Insurrection Act. And while this proclamation only pertained on its face, to the southern border, remember, it's the expanded border zone, which would include New York City. And let's say that there is some violence. Well, he could say, I'm going to send the army into New York City. Now, that would be a crazy thing to do, but there are people who know far more about Donald Trump than I do, like his niece, Mary, who say that he's crazy. Now, I don't know if he's really crazy. I mean, we've seen him pull back on the tariffs where he saw the bond market about to collapse. And so he still does have these tethers to reality. That's just my opinion. So I don't know how far he'll go, but he doesn't have people like General Milley or John Kelly, people who, progressives like us would never really think of as our allies, but now I do, at least, because in the fight against extreme authoritarianism, I want to get as many people together as possible who say, but those people are gone. That's my point now. You got people like Stephen Miller, who seems, if anything, more deranged than Donald Trump. Now, I don't know him either. Maybe he's really not the person that he appears sometimes on television. But if he is that person, then who knows what he will tell Donald to do. So that's the real danger. And I don't think it's going to work to invoke the Insurrection Act and dispatch the army to a big city. I'm not sure what the Army will do. I'm not sure what, the Army is a highly diverse organization. There are a lot of right-wing people in the Army, but there are Black people, brown people. Are they going to want to open fire on Americans? Kind of doubt it. At least I hope that's not true. But in terms of predictability, yeah, I've predicted a lot of things that are going to happen. I do think that there will be a report. And I do think that report will give its blessing to Trump taking extreme steps should he want to do that. And the question will be, will he want to do that? And if so, to what extent and how precisely will he do that?
Right. So I have a feeling that Trump is going to welcome this report, and whether or not he decides to implement it, if it recommends that. You mentioned that he doesn't want to talk about tariffs and the income and the economy, but we've totally lost track of what's happening in the Middle East. And
Oh, absolutely.
Ukraine isn't a story anymore. So the conversation for a while will be all about this and whether he should and whether he won't. And we do know that he has a part of the population that just bases their viewpoint on hatred of liberals and hatred of Black people and hatred of, like, people on this, coastal elites, and they don't really care what he does. They just like him to do it angrily.
Right.
The other thought I have is it's ironic. I don't think Donald Trump gives a sweet patootie about immigrants, illegal or illegal. But 8 or 9 years ago, when he started his campaign, he said all those nasty things. They don't send their best people, they send rapists and murderers. And that was just something he said off the top of his head, but it immediately gained a lot of traction. And it still gains traction. They have engineered a part of the population to think the woes in their life are all about Jose, who lives down the street, who they don't know and has nothing to do with their lives. And so he keeps pulling on that card and it keeps working.
Right. And we want to emphasize we're talking about undocumented versus documented.
Sure. So Donald Trump has the MAGA movement has a core which will line up behind whatever he says at the moment, even if what he says on Tuesday is different from what he said on Monday.
Right.
It's a lot like 1984, the novel by George Orwell, and it can change like that. But I think that core is really a very small, relatively small minority of the population, maybe 33%, tops 40%, in my view. And I do think that he's getting a tremendous amount of bad press on the tariffs. This Abrego Garcia case is not playing well for him. And I think that some people are very focused on the economy. And they're focused on universities. I mean, the Trump administration is trying to dictate what universities can teach, and almost to the extent that they're trying to control what people can say and even think. So it's very totalitarian, and most people don't like that. And when he starts reaching into trying to censor people's music, people's internet choices, I think you're going to see tremendous resistance that exceeds the ability of the federal government to contain that resistance. Now, I'm not talking about violent resistance or anything like that. I'm just talking about people who are living their everyday lives, and they're not going to change them just because some guy in Washington, D.C. doesn't want you listening to rap lyrics. And I do think there's going to be a massive pushback. I think it's already started. That doesn't mean that we're in a good spot. There's going to be a lot of pain and suffering. And I think that the first step is to understand that there is going to be pain and suffering, and it's going to be widespread. It's not just people who see their 401ks diminish. And that's not small, but it's going to be everybody. A lot of people have very small investments, but they're important to them. And they've been decimated by Donald Trump in the last 2 months. And they're concerned about that. And these tariffs, as I said, they don't make any sense. The formula that he used, it was pulled out of thin air. It made absolutely no sense. And he's already backed down on a lot of it. And the internal logic of the tariffs is really contradictory, because to the extent that the tariffs actually succeed in promoting American industry and having people buy American, they're going to fail to raise revenue, which he keeps saying, we're making billions and billions from the tariffs. That's simply not true. And to the extent that your import policy works, it won't be true. And that's what tariffs are supposed to do. You block out the foreign goods, so you promote an American industry. You know, trade policy is a whole different ballgame. You can argue, and I think very successfully, that China's trade policy towards the United States is terrible and we need to change it. But Trump doesn't have people who want to change his point of view, it seems, in the second administration, like he did in the first. He's just got loyalists. He's got young people with no experience. people who work for Doge, his chief White House spokesperson. She's only 27 years old. And then you have folks like Stephen Miller, who really seems so ideologically extreme, but he has Trump's ear apparently on an everyday basis. So we don't know where Trump is going to go starting next week, but I do think he's going to take this Insurrection Act and say, I will use it anytime I want to use it now, because I got two cabinet secretaries who tell me that it's something that's warranted. And if we have to use the National Emergency Act again in order to implement more powers beyond the Insurrection Act, why, their report tells me to go ahead and do that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bill Blum, I hate to admit it, but you've been right in the past, and you're probably going to be right this time. We're paying close attention to what's going to be happening on Friday.
You mean
Sunday?
Sunday.
I'm sorry, Sunday. But I think that Trump has really been building us up by talking about these Venezuelan gangs and all of these awful people that are coming across the border. He's given all kinds of reasons that would legitimize his use of the Insurrection Act, even though the courts and others have said that there is no such thing as this wide influx of Venezuelan gang members. But
So I want to say what you said is actually quite a fuel for a certain amount of optimism, because everything Donald has done, almost everything, is falling flat, as many of us have thought it would. He thought he would get together with Putin and Netanyahu and solve all the world's war in the first week, I think. Well, I think he said the first day, and none of that's happening. His big tariff plan and tax plan, that's falling on its face. The courts are showing spine. Now Congress is showing some spine.
Harvard is showing spine.
Bernie and AOC are bringing in people by the boatload. And Trump needs a new thing to talk about, but eventually he'll run out of that. And you're right. He only has 33% who are ride or die. They'll go everywhere with him, but that's only a part of the country. So I have some hope. I do think that we can't let these other issues, important issues, Gaza, Ukraine, tariffs, and whatever, go by the wayside because the topic du jour is something different.
That's right.
No, you can't do that. Just another way to think about it is that Project 2025 is being implemented. And part of 2025 is to flood the zone, to do so many things that the opposition is stunned. And my point, and this is an aspect of optimism, is that when you do so many things and people are fighting back, then you've got to defend against those so many things. And the Justice Department is not able to do that. That's why they want to bring these big private law firms under their control so that they can help defend his actions. And now they're going to start pulling back because they didn't realize what kind of devil's bargain that they got. I think that that's going to happen too.
Let's hope it's from your mouth to God's ears. Thanks, Bill Blum, for joining us, and we look forward to getting together soon, especially after the release of this report.
All right. Good to be with you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bill.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.